So it seems necessary in this obvious historical moment that il faut parler de la liberté. We need to talk about freedom. Not in an abstract sense, but in a more specific and non-prescriptive kind of way. Meaning, we can't think about freedom for ourselves in a way that tries to recreate situations, not simply because that's not likely to happen. Like, let's say, for example, you're feeling really good one day and you decide to call your happiness freedom, and you go and you try to recreate that again and again. Maybe you were at Disneyland, so you want to go back to Disneyland, but right now Disneyland's closed. So obviously, like, the thing you're thinking you do to prove to yourself that there's freedom is not available to you. So part of the reason that we can't use prescriptive ideas about freedom, meaning like what are the ingredients for freedom, is because the situations might change and freedom might not be possible if we can't get those ingredients. And so there's a specific idea that I mean to talk about from Jean-Paul Sartre that deals with what he says the impossibility of not living. I'll say that again, the impossibility of not living. So I think that one way we can understand this is that there's potential for freedom in every situation, which means freedom isn't a specific material factor. It is a potentiality, meaning like whatever materials are there, whatever the physical situation is, there is the possibility for human freedom. But obviously, the material situation limits what the specific things are you could do. Therefore, like, your freedom can't just be some thing. It can't be a specific action or a specific object. It has to be a kind of action in coordination with the current material situation. So specifically, like right now, your freedom is dwindled down to what it is you can be doing in this specific pandemic, in this crisis. What that means is that, like, we don't have any less freedom, because freedom is the potential of the material situation. But we're in a material situation that is very unfamiliar. This is where it comes back to making a distinction between a kind of like egotistical, individualistic, liberal understanding of freedom as being what it is that I can do, what is available to me. Materially, that makes sense because I only have access to the situation I'm in. But our freedom doesn't start with what we can do, it starts with what we don't have to do. So some of us might be finding our situation free from going to work because maybe you're working from home, or maybe you've lost your job. Maybe you don't go to school anymore because school is online, or whatever you used to have to do is not going on anymore. But for someone else, the same moment might mean kind of the opposite. Like maybe you go to work, and now when you go to work, you have to wear gloves and you have to wear a mask, and it's very, there's a lot of tension in the air, and it's very stressful. And so these things that you can do with your situation, it's not that there's more or less freedom in them. There's potential for your freedom in how you act with them. This is more evident now in this historical situation, the way that what is limiting your freedom is the same thing that's limiting someone else's freedom. And it's not your ability to express yourself. It's not like, oh, how can I act free, or how can I feel free? What can I do to show that I'm free or prove that I'm free? Instead, there's a kind of material limitation. We're only as free as our social situation permits, meaning your freedom starts when other people's freedom starts. We can't do whatever we want because we have limitations that are formed by our bonds with other people. Meaning, my freedom isn't when I can start expressing myself. If you're in a quarantine, you probably have all the time you want to write poetry or paint pictures or learn to play the piano. But your freedom isn't satisfying personal urges. Your freedom is freedom from having to worry, freedom from material limitations. Right now, we all have the same limitation of a viral pandemic, and that means that there's not total freedom as long as we live in fear of that. There's not total freedom as long as we're all afraid about how we're going to maintain income, or how we're going to fend off depression. The freedom is not freedom to do things, it's freedom from having to do things. It's freedom in solidarity with others, because that's how we overcome the material situation that we're in. It's how we overcome the historical moment that we're experiencing. You cannot overcome a historical moment by yourself. Maybe in a biographical moment, but understanding your biographical moment as an example of the same kinds of limitations that everyone else is experiencing. So if you're having trouble being creative or productive at home because you're quarantined, or if you're going to work still and you are stressed and afraid in ways that you never thought of associating with the kind of work that you do, then maybe what you're experiencing is the the reality of this moment. You're experiencing an instance of the material presence of this virus. It's not simply something you're infected with, and it's not simply something we see in stock market numbers or the GDP. It's also something that we experience as a constraint on ourselves. And it's not a kind of constraint that we can overcome individually. It's not like, oh, you toughen up. Oh, I need to accept what's going on. The methods need to be developed now so that they're helpful now. And these methods can't be something you do on your own. You need other people to help coordinate a response that's sufficient, because an individual response is entirely insufficient in this moment.